my Confessions, the most beautiful book ever.
Oh, it is. Oh, that is nice. That's
Okay,
really
I
nice.
have this
We're
one,
gonna have.
Boring Old Oxford.
I
I have that one too, but
Wait, I have this. It's right here.
this guy.
But anyways, oh yeah, but one of the great books was The Prince, and that was the only one I didn't buy.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do a quick ramble for all the recording people. I guess no one else showed up. We're just gonna have a private party. Cool. It's weird because so many people said they were gonna join or wanted to join. I got like dozens and dozens of messages on the full officer or
Oh,
whatever, but I guess only a few people show up. But I guess quick overview or some for people who don't know anything about Augustine or like the state of affairs in which he wrote this book. Basically, this book was written, or Augustine had a Christian mom and then a pagan father. He was born in North Africa, in a place called Thagalis, if I'm remembering correctly, or Thagaste. I think Thagaste was the name of the city. He was born during the end of the Roman Empire, like when it was starting to crumble and the Germanic tribes were just like filtering in left and right. So yeah, paganism was on the decline. Christianity was on the rise during this time, and Neoplatonism was also a big thing in play, with Plotinus kind of like pushing that whole movement. Same thing with Stoicism; it was still more or less prominent. Um, let's see. So Christianity was no longer seen as like a little sect, but it still was competing kind of like for popularity amongst other like competing, let's call them like cults at the time, or like religions, things like Manicheanism, which we'll talk about a lot in the future, or I guess in like coming book clubs. The way the book is set up is it's starts off like mostly like a biography, right? So going through his stages of life as a baby, then a teen, then a young adult, and it's basically him grappling with a lot of internal conflicts, philosophical conflicts, and then like things going on in his life. He talks a lot about Neoplatonism and Christianity, a lot about the Manichean dualism, like this big fight between like good and evil, like one of our profs would always say, kind of like a Lord of the Rings fight, like a big just like battle, a big clash between like good and evil. Talks about the anthropomorphism of God, like how in the Bible it sometimes, or in the Old Testament, it said like he walked or he talked or he did this thing or he showed himself. All of these like weird scripture type of like things that are said, which make it sound like God were a man or like some sort of flesh. Flesh being the absolute evil for the Manichaeans. Talks about the problem of evil. Talks about nature of God, the relationship he had with his mother, which was like very challenging, the death of the mother, death of friends, um, him being with a chick and then not being married because she was of low social status, having a kid, and then not wanting the kid and then wanting the kid. So just like a guy who was dealing with a lot of issues throughout his life, who wanted to be faithful, who wanted to believe, but also wanted, the immediate pleasures of the flesh at times. Later in the book, things like memory and time are talked about. So he subscribes to this view of presentism, where everything is in the present, right? Or everything in the mind is operating in the present, more or less. When you're thinking about the past, you're recalling, but in the present. When you're thinking about the future, it's expectation, but in the present. So like a funky B theory almost type of time. And then a lot of like stories of how he was sinful at certain times. One, I guess, like more important one that'll come to mind is the pear tree incident, where he talks about, or the story goes, that he and his friends at like a young age, they went over to a pear tree, shook it, a pear tree that wasn't theirs, shook it, stole all of these pears, maybe ate a couple, and then threw the rest to a bunch of hogs. And they did this out of the pure will to sin. Like there was no benefit to this sin. It was just like sinning for the sake of sinning. Um, and he kind of contemplates that. He even thinks that like even just being a baby who's constantly like whining and wanting to drink the breast milk and like always complaining, that in itself is like sinful as well. That babies aren't absolved of this type of sin. Um, and yeah, he's trying to deal with all that stuff, and that's basically where I'll leave it off. I don't know what we're gonna talk about too much today, but I kind of want to talk about Manicheanism and also the anthropomorphism of God, which I always found kind of interesting, or like the specific texts that are done or that are referenced in this book about like God being a person or having a hand or stuff like that. But yeah, that's about my little Manicheism. Manicheism was this like really particular sect or cult during the late Roman Empire. It started to gain some traction with a prophet named Mani. And they had a couple of like funny beliefs or different beliefs. One of which was that all that's material, anything that's like corporeal, is just evil. They also solved the problem of evil by removing the all-powerfulness of God, right? Because they couldn't square how God could be all good, but then also not be able to defeat evil because there's evil in the world. So they kind of solved that by saying, yeah, he's in a constant fight with evil. It's like some sort of like dualism. Similar in a way, kind of, to like Zoroastrianism, where there's like this fight between good and evil. But yeah, it was just like a sect. It's pretty cool. But yeah. Now you guys.
Yeah, another thing that's interesting about Manichaeism, at least when I first read the Confessions, there is kind of this feeling that Manichaeism is almost like this. It's something that's present at all times. It's almost just this like general paganism that kind of ropes in things from all different religions. You know, it's like the prophet Mani, like he believed in like the Buddha, and he believed in like Zoroaster, and he believed in Jesus, and he just thought he was like the last prophet in this line of holy men, which is very similar to, you know, stuff that you still get today, right? Where you have these people who say like, oh no, all religions are all actually the same, and then I'm the last guy in the line, you know? It goes like Buddha, Jesus, or Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, me. So it's just interesting that some of the pagan things that were happening in Augustine's time, there's still similar things that happen after and today, which I think, you know, can help us to view Augustine's world as maybe more similar to ours than it may first appear. Just an interesting thought. And also, if there's nothing else on this, I want to say a few things about Augustine's influence, because you took the Augustine course, and one of our profs' big things was like the wide-ranging influence of Augustine. So I thought it'd be good to say a few things in the first meeting, because it's, you know, why does this guy even matter?
Go for it. Yeah.
And I don't know if you, I don't know if you have your notes from that class. I only remember a few things that he said about in terms of Augustine's influence. I mean, one of the coolest stories is that, you know, when the Vandals sacked Hippo, which is the city that Augustine had his cathedral in, they burned everything to the ground, but they left his cathedral untouched. This was a bit after his death. So, you know, even the Vandals had some respect for Augustine. And then there's also stuff about, like, in the Reformation, like, I think Martin Luther has some writing saying that part of the heart of the Reformation is just a return to Augustine. Like, he viewed it as, like, you know, Augustine had the essentials down of Christianity, and the Reformation was somehow returning to this pure Christianity. And one last thing that I remembered was the story of Petrarch, which Petrarch, who was the poet who some credit with, you know, beginning the Renaissance, whatever that means, and, you know, the Renaissance being characterized by this inward turn where, you know, people start looking within at humans, more reflective, blah blah blah, etc., more human focused. And Petrarch cites one of his major inspirations for his poetry as this line in Augustine, that where Augustine talks about, I don't have the exact line, but it's something like, oh, you know, people are moved by the ocean, you know, they love the mountains, they love the skies, they think all this stuff is amazing, but in themselves they are uninterested. So then Petrarch reads this and he's like, whoa, so true. And then he, I guess, writes his poetry, and then the Renaissance kicks off, or at least that's the just so story that my prof, it's probably much more complicated than that, but it's just to say that, you know, he had a very wide-ranging influence, you know, from the Reformation to the Renaissance to even, I guess, the Vandals knew who he was, didn't burn his cathedral down. Yeah,
Yeah, like I think that
I don't know
prof
if you
would
remember
always
that.
say that Augustine's fingerprints are all over the place. His mother's name was
Yeah,
Monica, Santa Monica, right? That city. He was baptized by Saint Ambrose, a huge name in Christianity. Like yeah, like anywhere you look, if you look long enough or like hard enough, you're gonna find some sort of like Augustinian remark, right? At least like in writings
yeah,
and history. Yeah.
yeah. He's also a favorite philosopher of a lot of maybe your guys' favorite philosophers. Like he's one of Heidegger's favorite philosophers. He influenced his theory of time had a big influence on Husserl phenomenology stuff. Uh, Wittgenstein absolutely loved him. There's like a line in book one, which we need to talk about later when we read book one, that shook Wittgenstein to his core. He was quaking in his boots when he read it. So there's a lot. Augustine is everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost didn't sign up for that course because it was marked as or it was labeled as medieval philosophy. And I was kind of
Yeah.
under the impression that like medieval, nothing happened during those times. Like there was no development during the medieval like the dark ages. But I guess that
Yeah, that's what they say.
that view was rightfully switched or rightfully corrected, I guess.
Yeah. But even Augustine, I mean, it is a mislabeled course because he's like, I mean, you could say he's medieval, but he's really pre-medieval because normally you take the medieval to start, with the fall of Rome, but he was writing before. But whatever. He had such an influence throughout the medievals that it's, I think it's fair to lump him in.
Yeah. I also think it's important to note that he began reading Cicero's what is like Horse something with an H, Cicero's Hortensius, and that was like a little shift during. I think he read it when he was 18 or like relatively young when he was still kind of like banging around and being a little piece of shit. He read this book and then from there on out he decided he wanted to live an intellectual life, a life of mind as opposed to a life of pleasures or like these type of like secondary motivations or drives. I feel like Cicero also is one of those names or one of those people who have their fingerprints everywhere.
True. He's not as cool as Augustine.
Not as cool as Augustine though.
True. Yeah.
Hey Ori, how you doing? So yeah,
I'm doing
um,
all right.
yeah, good to hear. Good to hear. I think it's kind of I was like one of the things that blew me away most from this book, or one of the points that were made that blew me away most was the attribution of sinful acts to babies. A baby being sinful doesn't sit right with me. I love you, Augustine, but a baby being sinful, it's like how? They're supposed to be innocent, aren't they? I guess not.
Yeah, I mean that's like a big. I don't know. I'm not like a theologian or anything. I don't know. I know people defend this, like the doctrine, very staunchly, but I don't know. Even reading, I already read the first book, and it's. I don't know. I don't think it's as implausible as some people make it out to be. I mean, babies can be little shits, like they can be very greedy. They can be very jealous. Someone could say like, oh, but they don't know what they're doing, right? Maybe that's where the innocence comes from. They don't know that these things are wrong, but I don't know if ignorance is an excuse for sin. I mean, I think sin is more this condition that you're born with, and I think, yeah, I think you would say you're born with it.
But
I don't
I
know,
would
maybe
think
someone knows.
agency is what plays the biggest role in sin. And you could argue that a baby doesn't really have agency in the same way like a thinking adult has or a thinking person has like
Maybe,
agency.
but I mean, it's like,
No,
what do you
I think
mean?
I'm
Yeah.
inclined towards more stoic read. My whole I mean, and I think Aristotle would agree. It's like if an action isn't voluntary, then it's not blameworthy, right? And like I think that most people would hold that to be true. And so like voluntariness, like obviously, but I think that like what is underlying that is intention. And so it's like if something is not intended for malice, and I don't know if you could call it sin, if the intentions are good, if in your mind you think you're doing good, right? you can call it, like straying from your nature, sure. But like I don't think that God would consider it an offense against humanity unless you have access to information that you should have behaved otherwise.
I mean, I think the older conception of sin is more about the condition that someone is in rather than like you miss the mark because you're in a certain condition. It's not that you intentionally did or did not do something. At least that's how I have seen like the older conceptions of sin.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, later Christian. So I know, like Kierkegaard, for example, will take great issue with the Greek way of viewing things. Where I mean, yeah, like Plato, for sure. Where it's like, for Socrates, where it's like people only commit sins or do what's wrong because they don't know what's right. Like it's a knowledge problem. But then like later, like Kierkegaard, I know, for example, will say like no, like some, or even Dostoevsky. Like you read Notes from the Underground. It's like the idea is like no, sometimes knowledge is not really the problem. It's just like you're just fucked up. Like you're fucked in the head, and so you do bad stuff. So yeah, and I think that's very useful, like to view sin as a condition, because then you can see, sure, maybe these babies don't know what they're doing, but we can still look to them as a reflection of this condition that we all have, which is sin. And yeah, I mean, the question is like, okay, well, you said an action needs to be voluntary. Um, yeah, maybe you could say like voluntariness requires like something like the ability to reflect on your intentions. But if you just take voluntary to mean something like the ability to act on how you're feeling, then I mean I think babies do act in a voluntary way, right? It's like they're hungry, so they they cry and
I'm
they
using
grab at the breast.
voluntary. I'm using voluntary in like an Aristotelian way,
Oh,
like
okay.
meaning like it has to be, um, like both like willing and with full knowledge of consequences.
Yeah.
There's an aspect of reason
Yeah,
there, or
yeah,
knowledge, yeah.
But
yeah.
for Augustine, I guess this is kind of important, right? Like when you understand what it is to like will something, it's like he thinks that like willing and wanting are the same thing. So like if you want something that is good, right, then it's is as simple as basically like willing to be good, and that's like I don't know. I think that's like an interesting dimension to this, just because I'm coming off of having read on free choice of the will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to bring Kierkegaard too much into this because this is more about Augustine, but I mean, I think that this Kierkegaard does make the distinction between being guilt, like having guilt versus sin. Sin is more equated with despair than it is with guilt. It's more just about like every single human being is flawed, no matter the age, type of thing. Like that's kind of more what it is. Like every human being isn't perfect, and we never will be. This is more the message of Christianity as well, is that no matter how good we try to be, it's always gonna, we're gonna miss a mark sometimes. It's kind of impossible to be perfect. So it's just more pointing out like a fact of human psychology, I would say, than saying like you're guilty.
Like imperfect, you're just guilty of imperfection. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you're not guilt. It's not about guilt. I would say guilt is more um like I don't know. Sin is more like a state of being than like a sense of like I did something wrong.
More of a
It's
type of
more
like
just like a
emotional
condition that you were
feeling or
born in.
psychological state.
Um, maybe I shouldn't use psychological, more of like a spiritual state. Like, I mean, being distant from God in a sense to Christians is like you're already in a form of despair, right? Just because you're already disconnected. Like, I can't talk to him, I can't directly interact with him. So, in that sense, I'm already in a state of sin because I'm not one with him. That's more of like a mystic take, which is again, I'm trying to be more Augustinian than I am partying right now.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it, because this whole like Augustine's whole world is, or he does engage or interact with a lot of mysticism in his book. The Manicheans were pretty mystical, I would say. This whole
Right.
all
He
the
went from, was it like
astrology thing, like
Manichean to Neoplatonist, then to Christian? Is that the progression
Yeah.
he went? Okay.
I mean, I would say it's Christian Neoplatonism through and through. But it's, I mean, the Manicheanism was only in the beginning of his works, right? If I
Well,
remember correctly.
he engaged with them a lot during his early adulthood, and even I think taught for a while Manichaeism at their one of their schools, and he was a good friend with Mani, the prophet himself. But he never fully subscribed. But he was always like flirting with it, at least for his like early adulthood. But then he totally left it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, we'll talk about the baby stuff. I mean, I think it's more plausible than, I don't know. I think it gets caricatured a lot, but I think the way he writes it, it's not so crazy. That babies are kind of fuckers, that they're kind of, that they can be jealous, they can be greedy, they can be, and that's not, I'm not moralizing here, but it's just like a description, right? Like, I think that, I mean, you can imagine like a holy baby, like a baby, like you can
Can
imagine
you though?
Jesus, I mean, like, like you can imagine Jesus, he just sits there, uh, he's calm, and then, maybe he
So a
cries if he wants milk, but
baby,
then he drinks until he's full, and then he, doesn't drink anymore, like something like that.
so a baby being calm is like a holy baby.
I mean, I mean, in that, they don't throw temper tantrums, right? They're more in control of their emotions. Like I don't know.
Would we
Something
call
like
that?
that.
I
Stoic
just
baby.
I don't know if we're gonna call that a holy baby. I just call it a quiet one.
I would say stoic. Dude read some meditations.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would matter what's in their heart, I guess. But, you know, I'm just saying by some external markers, right? I mean, you can never know if someone's actually holy or not. It's like just I don't know. It's like what, I mean, the Christian belief is that Jesus was a perfect baby. So it's like, what kind of attributes would that have, right? Like, what what's different about Jesus than your average baby? What would Augustine say? Like,
That's a great
I'm saying,
question.
maybe.
Well, don't read the Gospels that never made it in because there's some weird stories of baby Jesus.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Those are
Can you
not
enlighten?
very
I
holy.
don't know of any. Can you enlighten me?
I think he like there was like some kids that were like bullying him at school, and he made them blind or something. It's pretty funny.
there's yeah, there's a story in one of those apocryphal gospels about, I think he like Jesus. I don't know. It's something about like a resurrecting like other kids in the in the playground.
Pretty much. I think he like
Yeah,
murdered some kids and then like brought them back to life
yeah,
after like the parents
yeah,
begged or something.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's the closest we get to any description.
Yeah.
I
But
had
I'm just
no
saying,
I had
like,
no
yeah,
idea,
we don't have
man.
a
I know.
description.
I'm kind of just messing with you too, but I get what
Yeah,
you're trying to say.
yeah. Let's see. Let's look for baby Jesus stories.
Baby I mean, the idea that he's 100% human and 100% divine at the same time. So he's going to act, I would assume, like a normal baby. I wouldn't say crying is sinful or complaining. He still had
No,
to suffer the human condition. He still had, the 40 days in the desert. There's still human
yeah, but
things
not
he had to
crying.
go
But
through, but he
but
also had
Augustine doesn't
divine
say
nature.
the yeah, but Augustine doesn't say the crying is what's sinful. It seems to be
Sure.
like something about greed or something. Like, I wish I had.
Yeah, it's like he's saying like things that are simple, like hitting your mother, right? Like when they hit the
Yeah,
mother, or when they steal the milk from the brother. Maybe not
yeah,
crying
like stuff like
exactly.
that. I didn't mean like crying as a general. I meant like
I know.
crying too much. Maybe is like,
Okay, got
but
you.
maybe it's a bad example.
I mean, I think it's more just pointing a human tendency for self-preservation. A lot of what Christianity is almost like against self-preservation if you think about it, right? Like just giving to others. If a criminal asks for like your jacket, give him your shirt too. A lot of it is just about forgetting the ego, forgetting the self, and loving your neighbor. And a baby doesn't know how to do that, just like everyone else doesn't. I mean, no one according to the
Yeah.
Bible was perfect other than Jesus and maybe Abraham, but I don't know. In Islam, we were told Jesus could speak from the cradle. That's pretty cool.
Must be nice. That would absolve Jesus of any of these type of sinful acts that Augustine like talks about, right? If he can speak, then he can get his way out of like having to steal stuff or having to hit the mother because he can just ask for it.
Yeah. I mean, there is a story. What is it? There's a story of him after he was born, and he was like talking to some dude on the street, like as a baby. It was something weird like that. I gotta find that story as well. No, he was talking to the thief that was going to be crucified next to him, and was like, "Hey, mom, that guy is gonna be crucified next to me when I get taken by the Roman government." And she's like, "Oh, dude, baby Jesus, that's so cool."
He's childhood friends with the thief.
Yeah. Damn, no one likes the baby talk.
Dude, they did not like the baby talk. Have you guys read the full? Well, I know you'd have, Bruno, but Cade, have you read the Confessions?
I've read part of the Confessions.
Thoughts?
I have it next to me. I never got through all of it.
Mhm.
I mean, I like the genre of it. It's not like a hardcore philosophical A plus B equals C. It's a lot more personal. It feels very human. I like reading more emotional text, especially from back then. It makes people, I guess, seem more real. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean that's the appeal to philosophy for most people. It's internal. It's like internal things, right? It's not like proving truths or logical arguments.
Maybe for existentialists. I don't know. It's just cool to see a very humanized figure. Like, what is he born? Like the year 300 something.
Mhm.
Especially back then, there's like accounts where he talks about how he would like pace up and down the halls, like pulling out his hair. He was so stressed. It's like you can almost like picture. Like I could imagine being like next to this guy almost. For a lot of these ancient philosophers, like I can kind of imagine being in the conversation, but their mindset seems so different. It seems like he's under the same afflictions that we are today.
Yeah,
I like that he
he's
doesn't put
struggling with
himself.
the same things.
He doesn't put himself in the light of like a great person. A lot of texts are like, it's almost you almost have this
Yeah.
feeling of like some sort of like someone who knows everything, someone who can prove a lot of things. Then when you read Augustine, it's just like, nah, I don't really know what's going on. I'm afraid. I don't know how to deal with these emotions or these feelings or these conflicts. There's like no good answers, at least in the like when he's speaking about his internal problems or issues.
Yeah, it's like the Nietzsche, his table of contents for his autobiography. It's why I'm so wise, why I'm so smart, why I write such good books, and why I am destiny. Those are all the contents of his book.
The complete opposite of
Yeah,
Augustine.
Yeah.
I can see why you would like this, Chris, because there's a lot of humility, which I think you like. Like he most of the book is him asking questions. I don't even know if he gives that many answers. I mean, there's a few answers, but most of it is just questions. He's like, "Oh, how can God be everywhere?" But then I want him to come into me, and then it's like, "Oh, how does time work? Like, is it like a, why is it that the present seems to exist, but it has no extension, and then the past, like, it's a lot of like, pontificating, questioning, uh, and yeah, it's very. I think it's very humble. Like, he doesn't presume to know more than he does.
Yeah, but also one thing that makes me kind of like bite back at that, I was watching a couple lectures and like reading some stuff about how he was educated. And I think even in the book, one of the passages, like he would get more frustrated at himself making a grammatical error than doing like other things or most other things. And he was very, very trained and like super, super good at rhetoric, at speaking and like at storytelling, at literature, all that type of stuff. And in a lot of these problems that he kind of presents, so things like issues of like memory or mind or dualism It almost feels like sometimes he's doing a little bit of sophistry, where he's like presenting a fake other alternative option, but really he already has the answer. He's just like setting up a very beautifully written like demonstration for the reader to pick up on like two competing things, when really like there's a good answer. Like there's a good, like when he talks about time and like what is time, how do we understand it, it's like he already kind of, it feels at some parts that he already knows. He's just leading us with some of these
Yeah.
philosophical
Well, that's
arguments.
fair. I mean, yeah, that's like what Plato did basically. That's a He's in good company. Yeah, it's interesting that you say like the grammar thing, because there's some great stuff in the first book about, which almost like reminds me of Pascal, just about him talking about like, oh, someone will get up on a stage and like give this horrible speech about how he hates this other guy, but he'll just he like pays great attention to make sure his grammar is perfect, but he doesn't care that what he's saying is like horrible. It's like this like human tendency to prefer you know the exterior, the flower, it's like Pascal has a story of a guy who goes up and he you know gives a speech also, but then his hair is kind of messed up, so no one listens to what he says. It's like these external things matter, which I think is also, I mean, probably ties into the whole our fallen nature or whatever. Yeah, we don't have the same page numbers. This is gonna be so annoying, Chris. Every time. But he says, when a man seeking for the reputation of eloquence stands before a human judge, while a thronging multitude surrounds him, inveighs against his enemy with the most fierce hatred, he takes most vigilant heed that his tongue slips not into grammatical error, but takes no heed lest through the fury of his spirit he cut off a man from his fellow manship. So like people, people are more offended by grammatical mistakes than about someone committing like a horrible sin, like hating someone,
I mean, yeah,
which I think
you see it
is
in like any type of like argument or like bickering, especially online. It's like that's why people will like immediately correct you, negate your argument if you spell your incorrectly, and then that's like a fatal blow. It's like, fuck, you got me.
yeah. Yeah, he's a great. He says a human being, so human without the H. A human being will offend men more than if, in opposition to thy commandments, a human being were to hate a human being. So it's like a human being, like a grammatical mistake. Yeah, but whatever. I mean, I'm getting ahead of.
Is there a
It's
particular
pretty funny
section
though.
that y'all like in the book? Well, I don't know. Answer that question. Is there a particular part you guys like?
Um, let's see.
I just like in general the way that he praises God, because I'm a Christian myself, so I think his is a lot more relatable. I don't really like I don't know. I have a lot of problems with modern Christianity. We can just say that in the way that they present God, the way they, yeah.
Wait,
So
Cade, were
I
you
guess
at the
all of it.
Machiavelli one? Like,
I was sick for a few weeks, so I did not attend.
have I met you before? No.
Maybe once. I think.
Were you the guy who was
Well,
reading
actually,
McIntyre, or was that a different guy?
no. I think I was there for the Machiavelli intro,
Okay,
like
but
like
you're
the
not the guy
first
who was
one.
reading McIntyre.
No,
Okay.
I'm known as the Kierkegaard guy. This label was imposed on me.
Cade did a lot of the
I
heavy
just want to
lifting
know.
when it came to Fear and Trembling.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I asked
Yeah, and
Bruno
people
a
ping
lot
me in
too.
the
I was
Discord a
struggling
lot.
understanding the difference between what was it, like the Night of Faith and the Night of Infinite Resignation, or I don't know, one of those things.
Oh yeah.
You think you got it down?
More or less.
Kate, are you a Catholic?
I'm probably Protestant. I mean, I admire the Catholic tradition, but
Yeah.
my heart is more Protestant.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same boat. I don't know. We'll see. I might, because I grew up Christian. I grew up Protestant, and then I kind of went away from it. and then I read Augustine and Kierkegaard, and I was like, whoa, I got to get back on this.
I mean,
And
pretty much the same for me.
yeah,
Kierkegaard really.
and then
Yeah.
but again, like now I love the Catholics, but I feel distant from it because I grew up, Protestant. But we'll see. I might be going to a Catholic university. Maybe they'll convince me.
I'm more a fan of the
Or law
Orthodox
school.
and their mystical tradition than I am of the Catholics. So
Yeah. Well, when I was in undergrad, I started going to this Orthodox church, and I think they really have something special there. But I can't, like, it's so hard to find an Orthodox church, and they're always like Russian or something. So I don't feel, at home. But I do love the Orthodox. Yeah, like there's one right next to where I'm living now, but it's like Russian. So it's like I don't know if I don't feel like I belong there. Everyone's Russian.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Mr. Fufu, I like the autobiographical part. So like the first 9 books, they're good. They're easier to read. Like they're more fun, right? But I think I engage with the part of memory and time, of like mind distension. So when Augustine's talking about things like depression is just like your mind reaching into the past, I think one of his quotes are, or like trying to reach at the past, and then the anxiety that people feel is like concerning yourself with the mind reaching out into the future, but everything is happening in the present, and this desire to like for the mind to reach out beyond the present is what causes this type of like either depression or anxiety, right? I really like that stuff because it talks about, it's like the B theory of time basically, but in a more palatable way, I guess, as a mind distension. That's like the root of all anxieties and depression. That was
Yeah,
my part.
I can answer too. One of my favorite parts of the book is I don't know what book it is or what chapter it is, but I think sometimes it's labeled as like it's the chapter where his mom dies basically. But that one he talks about
Book
grief.
9, yeah.
And then he also describes like this experience that he had with his mom, which is almost like a mystical experience where they're on this boat going down this river. And it's just so beautiful and it's so amazing. And it makes me think of my mom a lot because Augustine's mom is known as, like the classic image of Saint Monica is her crying over Augustine, uh, because she wanted him to convert so badly. And I feel like that was a similar thing with my mom, where she saw me kind of drift away into atheism, and she was just always praying that I would come back, and I did eventually, like Augustine. That's like a nice. Also, I saw Saint Monica's grave in Rome, which
No
is very
way.
cool. Yeah,
that's pretty sick.
That's dope. That's a flex.
yeah. It was just me and this other Italian guy who was like rubbing the grave.
I'm very new to philosophy. Could you suggest me something deep to read?
Oh,
The Confessions. Oh.
maybe you should like put out what you want to know about. A lot of people in philosophy, they're more analytical, or maybe they want to know questions about love or
Yeah, like
religion.
what interests
Yeah.
you about philosophy basically? And then if you can answer that question, I can maybe try and point you
But
in a direction.
also, yeah, if you're interested in just like classic philosophy, like like the old guys, like Augustine and all these cool guys, the best place to start is the 5 Plato's first 5 dialogues. Okay, and they come bundled together, and they're really good, and they're really easy to read, and they're funny, and they're very deep. I think Penguin sells them as the last days of Socrates. I think. I'm trying to find,
Yeah, if
but
like
that's
you
the
if you
best
want to start off,
best
just
starting point.
yeah, start off with Socrates or just like any of Plato's stuff. More inclined towards the aspects to answer questions, like coming to truths. Well, I guess all philosophers, that's kind of a goal, is to come to a truth. And some people will get there one way or another. Like if you're reading Plato and stuff, they're gonna arrive at truths through reason. But if you're reading Augustine, he's gonna arrive at truths through what is it, like divine understanding, something like that.
Revelation, but also
Divine
reason.
revelation, yeah.
Yeah. Read this. It's very good. very funny, very short, very deep, as you say.
I mean, I think just reading philosophy will make you better at sifting through questions. If that's really, as you
That's
said,
true.
more inclined to ask. Well, yeah. I mean, just read, gather information. You'll get better at it, and you'll probably find your own niche. I found my own. I did start with like Plato, though, as most people did, and the pre-Socratics. Don't forget about the pre-Socratics; they're pretty cool too.
True. Also, your name is Xanax Fangs. I would suggest you don't do Xanax anymore, at least recreationally.
Only when you're reading postmodernism.
But yeah, then it's okay.
If you're reading some Deleuze, because I can't read that guy half the time.
Oh, also on, it might be a bit like off topic, but also on like or like parts of the books that I like. I really liked at one point of the book, I forgot which book. It's when he's dealing with this like astrology or astronomy type of argument, or like the Manicheans were very fond of their astrology slash astronomy, and then Augustine kind of, he doesn't like it too much, and he comes up with like a thought experiment or like an example where astrology just is disproven. And I thought it was kind of like, it is like, it's pretty clever. I mean, the idea is that depending on where you're born and when you're born, the stars are in a certain configuration, and that will determine how you end up living your life, or so said the Manicheans, right? To some extent. So Augustine was like, all right, well, let's take an example of twins being born. Two twins are born at the same location and at the same time, but their lives will end up completely different. And that was like his case against astrology, or like Manichean astrology, which I like that. I like that part of the book too. I really like it when philosophers use examples or stories to get a point across, or like a thought experiment. Yeah.
Of the dialectic.
You know, Chris, when you know Alex Boynich, yeah, you know Alex Boynich. When he took this class, they had to talk about Augustine's argument against astrology on the exam, and then Kroll was doing this thing where like you had to then argue against it. So you had to argue in favor of astrology on the exam, and yeah, and then Alex's argument I thought was pretty clever. He was like, "Oh, it's true." He basically like turned uh, Augustine's response to the problem of evil on him, because Augustine's response to the problem of evil was like, oh, like life goes on after death, so people will be punished and whatever, blah blah. But then Alex said like, oh, life goes on after death, so maybe after death you really start acting like your astrology sign, like we we don't have enough of data just here on Earth to say that astrology is false, which I thought was funny.
That's
But
clever.
also kind of ridiculous, but
That's
yeah.
clever. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, just saying like, oh wait, but you don't know like the full extent of life. There's more. Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe when I go to, when I go to the seventh heaven, I'll start acting like an Aquarius, and it'll all make sense.
I do like the more Jungian take where he's like, astrology only claims to say that where and when you're born matters. Like the context you were born in matters. That's not to say it's accurate, but it's to say like
Yeah,
you should really consider I was born
yeah,
at this time in this place in this context, and this will change the way that I think and the way that I am.
That sounds like such a weak claim. It's
it
like,
is very
obviously if you're
Jungian.
born in China, you're gonna, and like it's gonna make a difference in how you
Yeah,
develop versus America.
it is, but that's as far as I give
Yeah.
astrology credit usually. Is like I admire them trying to give, some context behind the time and place they were born in. Maybe a culture that's more traditionally bound might like enforce this type of thing too. So it might have made more sense back then.
One
I'm
thing
not
I
sure.
find interesting about this time in Christianity versus like modern Christianity is that back then they would wait for, and I'm a little bit confused about this. I don't know if it was just the social
Oh yeah.
custom or anything like that, but they would wait a long time before baptizing themselves or before becoming baptized so that they could sin as much as they could. I heard like some professors say, like sin as much as they could, and then um be baptized and kind of like rid themselves of all that sin. And it reminds me of like, it's like a kid who will say, why do I have to shower in the morning if I'm gonna get dirty? I'll just shower at night to like get all of the stench off instead of showering in the morning when I'm clean. So I don't know when that custom kind of changed, because now I've heard it, like I've had friends who like have rebaptized, but no one who's just like or it's very uncommon for someone to baptize themselves just late on for the first time.
Yeah. But I think I remember maybe it was in our class, the prof also saying that uh the belief then was like, when you get baptized, then you're washed of your sins. So then any sin after that is like really bad because you're dirtying yourself again, basically. So then the idea was like, oh, you wait until you're about to die and then you baptize yourself so then you can die totally without sins. But I don't know. That's been yeah, no one thinks like that anymore. So I don't know. I don't know what changed.
I mean, that's exactly what Augustine's father did, right? He was a pagan, but I guess he was convinced by the very, very end to baptize himself right before dying as a just in case. Hi, Henry. Did you do any like readings, or are you familiar with any of this stuff? I guess you missed like the intro or talking generally about what the book's about.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually read the introduction to my copy yet. Been a bit slower than I wanted to, but I studied a bit of Augustine in school, like little like bits and bobs. But I'm not really familiar at all with it. But I'm really interested because I love Christianity so much. So I'm very looking forward to it. But I don't know anything about it. Like all I know is he's like confessing his past sins and he had a conversion. That's literally it. So I'm going in blind, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, that'll be super fun. We just talked about how Augustine, as like a figure, has his fingerprints everywhere. Anywhere you look, there's like hints of Augustine, and then also just like the way it's written, is very easy to read, and it puts him in a very like human light. Like he seems just very human the way he's writing. Yeah. And about Manicheanism, which maybe we'll run into. Are you familiar? It was like this weird sect or like this weird religion that he got into. And they had some funky beliefs. Like they were all vegetarians, for one. They didn't have any wine. They believed that all flesh was evil. Just like flesh itself is evil. A lot of them would be celibate, and then they would like divide themselves into two people, like the hearers and the elites or something like that. And the elites would be celibate, vegetarian. Meat was flesh. What other funky beliefs? Oh yeah, God isn't all powerful. He's just all good. So there's like a big clash between like good and evil constantly going on in the cosmos. Like a mystical like gas of like good and evil just like always fighting against each other and twirling around in the sky is like the picture I have. And Manny the prophet, he was like a really outspoken guy, basically like a sophist, let's call him. And then what other funky beliefs did they have? They were like underground. Oh yeah, they weren't allowed by the empire or by the imperial. This was like it all takes place at the very end of Rome, or yeah, at the very like the falling of Rome, and they were like not really allowed. An educated group nonetheless though, and like kind of underground missionaries is how they'd get recruit people to Manichaeism.
Damn, that's crazy.
What I don't understand, maybe Bruno, you can answer this to me, or Kate, I guess too. Um, so one of the problems that Augustine brings up is how God can be three people at once, and by that he means like the Trinity, right? So how it can be three things at the same time, but not a unity. And I remember asking this question a lot because I don't know, I never wrapped my head around it well. How can God be three things at once? How is it a multiplicity
I mean-
and a unity?
I mean, this is like a question people ask all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, like growing up, I never even thought about it until people started asking. I mean, it's there is also a running joke too that there is no analogy that perfectly
Yeah,
explains
that's true.
Trinity. So I'm hesitating to answer you. But I mean, I like to think of it this way, like as human beings, we are not this is my Kierkegaard coming out. We are not just like one single thing. We are an ongoing process. We're constantly changing, and there's different aspects of ourselves. Like when I'm angry, I'm almost a different version of myself than I am when I'm happy. It's almost like I'm one being, but I can manifest the way I interact with the world in many different ways. And these different ways don't make me have multiple personality disorder, right? I'm not a bunch of separate beings. I am still me. I am still one. Even though every single day I'm changing, every single day I could be acting in a completely different manner. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good analogy. It's still an analogy though, and I think you're right what you
Right.
said. There's no analogy. I mean, I mean the joke is like any analogy that you give will end up being some famous heresy. So I think the one you just gave, the closest heresy would be modalism, where it's like
Right.
the
Sure.
Trinity is just three
Just
different modes
of
of the same
being.
being.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but I don't know. I mean, I think C.S. Lewis has a great thing about it, which you can read. I haven't read it in a while, but it's in Mere Christianity, and he just basically says like, "Look, dude, like we can't understand God, and we're humans. We can't fully understand God. So there is going to be like this mystical, mysterious element that I think no matter how much you think about it, you'll never fully understand it. It's almost one of those things where it's like I feel like if you hold it in your mind, sometimes you can kind of get a glimmer of understanding. But I mean, the doctrine's very simple. It's one God, three persons.
Right.
So
Both
they're all
100%
God.
or all 100% God. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all 100% God. So they're not like it's not like a Megazord where it's like they're 1/3 of God and then they come together. It's not that it's they. It's not like people will say sometimes like liquid water and vapor, or no, liquid ice. Sorry,
Right.
water,
The water
ice, and
example,
vapor.
the egg example,
Yeah, but then it's
all
like
these.
that doesn't work. That doesn't really work because it's like then it's like well, you know.
Well, I think the
I don't know.
understanding is supposed to be implicit. It's supposed to be intuitive. I mean,
Yeah.
like Kierkegaard often talks about this a lot. It's like faith isn't just any system that I can come up with. It's something that I actually have to live and experience. Like I can't just. And I know that's unsatisfying for a lot of people. People kind of see that as a cop out in a way. Like, well, I think you
Yep.
just can't explain him. And I, I don't know. Maybe it is, depending on your perspective, but I don't see it like that.
But
A lot of
and also,
things
I
you
mean, I
don't
think
learn by arguing about it,
yeah, it's true. It's true. A lot of things you don't learn by arguing. I think that brings in like a big theme in the confession, which is revelation and reason. So it's like there are certain truths in Christianity where you can't reason your way to them because they're revealed. So it's
Well,
like
like,
these are
yeah,
moments. Yeah,
to learn to walk,
these
I
are
didn't
moments when
argue
God
you
is.
into being able to do it,
Yeah,
right?
it's like, but revelation. It's like these are moments where God is coming down and being like, "Look, you guys would not have figured this out on your own, so I'm just going to let you know how it is." And the Trinity is one of those things. I don't know if there's like a deductive argument you can give from first principles to arrive at the Trinity.
Right.
Some people do, but I don't know.
I'm going through my notes, and it's the idea of like going from the Imago Dei, image of God, to the Trinity. So you can understand the Trinity as a multiplicity and a unity. And an example or a way that the Romans tried to explain it during this time is that the word, for example, like persona would be a person is one thing, and a persona would be someone who is on stage, right? But they put on different masks. So they become different things but remain the same person, the same thing. But they can be multiple things at the same time. And that's the analogy or example some Romans were using at the time to understand the
That's
Trinity.
still like
How
the
something can be
modalism type
multiple
thing,
things.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I always just tell people just try to engage with Christianity. It might just make more sense to you over time. I don't really, again, I don't really like to give a hardcore doctrine other than it's three persons, like one God, 100% God.
So one question I have then
Yeah, I mean that is the doctrine.
about revelation
Yeah.
that doesn't quite click with me is that how come I understand that God can reveal himself and people can just like decide not to pay attention or not to look. but I do feel like there is a small group of people who are constantly trying to search for revelation or make themselves available for revelation, but yet are never presented with it from a very, very honest point of view. And I think, who was that? The guy that moderated like the Dawkins and Pedersen debate recently? I forget his name, but the guy with the mustache. He talks about that. Like, his whole life he'd been searching for a type of revelation, very, very honestly, but it never came to him. So how would a Christian kind of explain that type of person who's always seeking for God to show himself, but God never comes? Why does he choose some people over others?
I take the Kierkegaard perspective, and I kind of take like this natural signs thing, which is kind of what you're talking about, right? Looking for natural signs, looking for the revelations.
No, not in a
Or a
natural
little
sense,
bit.
but like even in just like a emotional, enlightening, like divine sense, right? Like the fig tree moment for Augustine, right?
Well, right. Now I'm kind of forgetting what I was gonna say, but I mean, interesting enough, Kierkegaard, he talks about how he thinks it's basically people are impoverished either emotionally or they rely too heavily on their intellect. I mean, one of his famous quotes is, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." I think a lot of the time, if we approach the questions of this as just another problem to solve and we never end up, I mean, you kind of have to live it, right? Like, from my personal experience, it's when I stopped trying so hard to search for these revelations that things started clicking more. You know, I try not to see Christianity as a set of issues to solve, more of a practice that I live in my everyday life. And I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I'm kind of trying to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, there is like I agree with what you said, but also there is. I mean, it's an impossible question to answer. It's like, why do
Right.
some people believe some things and others don't believe those things? It's like
Like, why did I have
I
this
have
experience and
no.
you didn't? I can't,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like I have no idea. I have no clue, and it is a big mystery. I think in the, because the whole idea in like the New Testament is that the Holy Spirit has to convict your heart, right? Like your heart has to become convinced by the Holy Spirit, and it's like what causes that? I have no clue, and I don't think anyone could give you a satisfying answer to that. But then I mean, there's also the I feel like it doesn't make sense. It makes sense. So you're talking about Alex O'Connor's, right? He has like the divine hiddenness argument. It makes sense for him to make that argument, but no one else can make that argument using him because the whole argument is predicated on a first person perspective. Like you have to say like I have genuinely searched for God, looked for him, really, looked at everything honestly without any bias and wanted to, find him and whatever, and yet he didn't come. You can't say that about Alex O'Connor. Only he can say it about himself. And I don't know to what extent he's telling the truth or not, So it's like an argument that only works uh, from the first person perspective for yourself. Like you can't use Alex O'Connor as an example of someone who genuinely is seeking God but can't find it. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't know if he is. You can never know.
Yeah, but I feel like
That's like the
it's not a huge step or like a major claim to think that those people exist, right? And it's not like a proof I need to make. It's like it's pretty plausible that there exist people out there who want to believe and who try to believe, but just who can't because of so many people that claim that, right? It's like either everyone who's claiming that is just like lying to themselves or just not being genuine or honest, or it's
yeah.
the actual case.
But I think, I mean, is it really that crazy to think that people lie to themselves, especially about something as big as, changing your full worldview? I think people,
I think it's
like,
crazy
that
to
is the
say
human condition, is we
I
lie to
think it's
ourselves.
crazy to say that all of the people who claim that are lying to themselves, if they're being genuine. It's super clear that a lot of people lie to themselves, right? But if every single person that's claiming and trying to be as genuine as possible is lying to themselves, that seems like less plausible.
I mean, I think
I
now we
think
need to
every,
define what's genuine and what's a real, pursuit of this. This is kind of a convoluted conversation a bit.
yeah,
I
but
would
I
say.
would just say, I mean, I think everyone is lying to themselves. Like every human is lying to themselves. So it's just the question is, what are you lying to yourself about? So I mean, I'm not saying that all of these people who are doing this are lying to themselves about this specific thing, but I'm just saying it. I think the argument only works from a first person perspective because it's true. It's like I don't think it's that implausible that, if Christianity is true, then the thing that's preventing people from believing it who are genuine seekers is some kind of self-deception. Just the same as, for maybe like there's a lot of people that believe the earth is flat, right? And it's like I think that those people, probably not all of them. I mean, there's probably a lot of earnest ones, but I think that a lot of them, it is a self-deception. It's like they want to believe something that's cool and that's like fringe and that like,
But
takes down the system and
can't you
whatever.
just
And
use that exact? Couldn't an atheist just use that exact same logic towards people who claim to believe in God and who claim to have had these experiences?
I was gonna say
Yeah, you
that
could.
too. Like as a
you
Christian too,
could.
as well. Like I don't think my belief is any more,
Yeah.
greater than anyone else's.
No, but you absolutely could. But I'm just saying that, like, you could say like, oh, all Christians are lying to themselves, and that could, it's very possible like that could be true. But I'm just saying that uh, to use that as an argument for atheism would be absurd because you don't know if if the
But then,
Christians are lying to themselves.
Right, just as using it for a Christian would also be absurd in some sense.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying like if you, Chris Ramirez, genuinely believe that you have been searching for God as hard as possible and have genuinely been like really looking as hard as possible and humbling yourself and whatever, and he hasn't appeared to you, I think that could be a pretty solid argument for your own atheism. I think, but I just think you can't use other people's. At least that's my view. But I also take your point that it's like maybe it would be it's too much to claim that every single person who claims this is lying to themselves. I take your point.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, not that like I definitely haven't. I can't sit here and say that I have tried my hardest to find the truth or the light of God in any, not even close really. Like yeah, I've read the Bible. Yeah, I've engaged with stuff. Yeah, I've gone to church. I've done all these things. But, like not wholly, not like as earnestly as the argument would hold. But I'm just thinking like if it's the case that God just simply doesn't show himself to these types of people, that seems a little bit evil. That seems mean. It's like someone who's always trying to reach out of the water and grasp at the hand that's being offered to other people, but they themselves can't grab onto that hand for one reason or another, that they have no explanation for. It just seems like, damn, that's kind of mean. Like you promise all these nice things and then you just don't.
I mean, as a Christian, we don't say like signs are just completely obvious too. There's a lot of signs that probably I would argue people miss, right? Even just like little things in everyday life that you might not even notice.
Yeah, and that's so true, and that's why I don't even like. I think maybe I'm coming across wrong here because I don't mean like I feel like lying to yourself is such a loaded phrase, which is not really what I mean. I mean it could just mean something like what you said, something as simple as like, oh, a small miracle happened, some crazy coincidence, some crazy blessing, after and then you just say like, oh no, it's just a coincidence, like it couldn't be God because there is no God. So it's like stuff like that I'm lumping in with lying to yourself, even though it's like I don't know, maybe I don't have that, I'm not trying to be very like morally loaded when I'm or condescending when I say lie to yourself, because again, like I said, I think it's something that we all do. But yeah, like I agree with what you said, Cade. Like sometimes signs are small, people misattribute it, attribute it to other things. Not everyone's gonna have like a road to Damascus experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian too, I think you probably know this growing up. Like, you almost look at everything and you wonder, was God's hand involved in that? Right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's like a common conception people have unless they grew up
Yeah.
with it. Like, was God's
Yeah.
hand in this? Was it in that? And then a lot of people say, well, this can be scientifically explained. It's not God's hand, but, and then I would say, well, I think those don't need to contradict each other. But we could go
Sure.
on and on with this.
Could you not be like in danger of misattributing things due to your Christian upbringing?
Well, the problem is
but-
they see it as mutually exclusive, which is kind of what I was saying, right? They're like, oh, it's either God or it's science. It's like, well, why can't it be both? Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be just a scientific explanation or just a appeal to God. I think both of those are misguided.
But I would think that
But also,
Especially the appeal
Henry,
to God.
but Henry, I take your point. Like, I think,
Sorry, go.
yeah. No, I was gonna say I take your point. Like, I think I think Christians do have to be careful too of not developing almost like a schizophrenia, right? Where
Yeah,
it's like,
no, I
like-
totally agree. That's like
Yeah.
one of the biggest things Christians do that does make me upset is when they just deny science or like it was God. It's like,
yeah,
well, we can have both.
or I mean, or even like you have to be careful not to view everything as a sign. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
well, it can get
I'm gonna
really
flip a
bad.
coin.
It can get really bad too with the science deniers. Like they'll start attributing mental illness just like, oh, they just don't read their Bible enough. Oh, they're
Yeah,
possessed.
they're
Oh,
demons.
they're like that can go really extreme. And I have personal
Yeah.
experience with this, so this is something that I try my hardest to avoid.
No, but I'm just saying, I had a friend who had this thing. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was something like, it was like he would go on a quantum like number generator, and he would be, and he had this view because he was Christian back then. Now he's not, but he had this view that like, oh, God controls the little, the quantum indeterminacy or whatever. So any question that I have to go to this like number generator and generate a number, like one or two, and it'll give me a sign about like what I should be doing next.
I
And I
have
think
heard of
that's
that
like,
too. I've heard of that
yeah,
too. I know people that did that.
yeah, and I think that's like absurd. That's like misattributing. You're seeing signs that
We can
aren't
go full
there.
Spinoza, right? God is the universe, and
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's something everyone has to be vigilant of, right? All the time, and me especially. I'm very bad at this. I always lie to myself about many things.
yeah, and I appreciate your
Yeah.
criticism, Henry. Like that is something I also try to point out
Yeah.
to people who are Christians in my life because it's destructive at times. It's very
Sure.
anti-intellectual. It can be, it's off-putting to many people as well.
Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna say something, Chris.
I forgot a little bit, but I'm just still trying to process. One you can say it seems like an epistemic issue. One you can say that it was a sign versus not versus just a random thing, and also with the issue of like it being science and divine intervention or like divine action or intervention or something that God played a role in. I feel like most instances of divine revelation or like moments when people genuinely felt like God was being revealed to them in one way or another. It's not a scientific thing, right? Or it's not an easily explainably scientific thing. It's because it's completely phenomenological, right?
There's a lot
Very
of cognitive
experiential.
scientists that study mystical experiences, though. Like there is a lot of science behind certain mystical, what is it, the pure consciousness event. There's like a lot of different studies on this stuff. I think it's actually pretty scientific as well
But
as
yeah,
spiritual.
it's true. But also, but Chris, I mean, there's not every like religious experience is going to be like some, like mystical, like fire, and you see pillars of fire or whatever. Like for example, here's a story. Okay, uh, that I don't want to get into like, just talking about like different things that happen. But Armand, Armand, right? His parents are Muslim, so he grew up in Malaysia. His parents are Muslim. His dad, very devout Muslim, and then he comes to Vancouver, ends up converting to Christianity, and he is for a long time, thinking to himself, he's like, oh my gosh, like how am I going to tell my parents, like, okay, and then later on he decides he has this thing where he's supposed to go back to Malaysia to work with this company that they're paying for his tuition. So he's supposed to go back and work for them. And then he decided he wants to go into academia. So he's like, oh, like he tells his parents, he's like, oh, I want to stay here, go to academia. And then they're, very angry about it. They're like, no way, no shot, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I told the story in the wrong order. That happens first. Then he converts. Okay. Then he converts to Christianity. And then he's one night very, feeling very hopeless. He's like, how am I going to tell? First, there's the freaking academia thing, and then now there's like the Christian thing. Like, I have no idea how I'm going to tell my parents anything. And this is the day after he converts. Okay, this is also important detail. The day after he converts. So then he's like in his room. He starts praying. He's like, oh my God, like please, just like show me what I'm supposed to do. Blah blah blah. And then that night he gets a call from his mom, and she says, just had a total change of heart 180. She's like, look, Armand, like, we've been thinking, and like, we think that if you're really passionate about this philosophy thing, like, you should stay in Vancouver and you should pursue that. Okay, so now that is a fully explainable event, right? It's just a coincidence. It's like, okay, yeah, so what, he converted, and then his mom happened to be also reflecting on their conversation that they had a few months ago, and she decides to, call him up, and so it's very easy to just explain that through purely the event that took place, because I mean that is what happened. I mean that's literally just a description. You could give a perfectly closed causal account of exactly everything that happened that led to that. But then the Christian looks at that and is like, oh, like this was, a blessing. Like I prayed for this and my prayer came true. And there's no clash there between the scientific explanation and the Christian explanation at all. It's not like it's like, oh, God has to literally, break the causal chain and cause this like crazy thing to happen. It's like a lot of times it's just like what manifests scientifically as a wild coincidence has some deeper spiritual significance for,
Well, right. He doesn't have to break the laws of physics,
or
He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to use magic.
I don't think I'm thinking about it in those terms. It's more so like if that same stuff were to happen to someone else, they would just completely attribute it to chance or randomness. Why was Armand so lucky to be in the frame of mind and in the like the state to accept that as some sort of a sign versus someone else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't. I think the state of mind does play into it. I mean, if Armand, but the point is, like, Armand was praying for this, and then this precise thing came true on the day that he was praying for it. So it's kind of hard to imagine someone who was an atheist this happening to them. Like it's like part of the miracle or part of the spiritual significance of the event was the praying that led to. So I don't know.
But
I mean,
even
I'm
like,
guessing. I'm guessing you guys feel like the Christians are almost adding something to it that doesn't really
Yeah, that's
need
what
to
I'm
be
saying.
there. That doesn't really need to be there either way. Like, am I wrong? Is that kind of what it feels like to people who are not Christians
I don't know if
that
they're
we're adding?
I don't know if they're no, they're just I feel like they're just experiencing or perceiving it differently. Like they have a
Yeah.
non-deterministic.
Well, that's how I would say
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of.
I mean,
one of my favorite examples. Like recently, I saw a post on Instagram, and it was like people are like, if you had like a uranium rock and you presented this to like a medieval peasant or something, you say, if I just combine this with another rock, I can level an entire city. They would say you're a sorcerer, right? They say that that's magic, right? It's all a matter of perspective. Like I could almost see. I mean, it almost is. It feels almost like magic that we can just combine two rocks and make an entire, city disintegrate. That's just one way of looking at it. On top of that, I can also have my scientific explanation. So I guess if I really wanted to, I could say, well, that's kind of like magic. At the same time, I can have my scientific explanation. I mean, black holes to me, they're so crazy. It doesn't even matter what scientific explanation you give me, it still blows my mind. It still almost seems like a miracle, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're getting a little off topic, but I love, like, that's very true. And C.S. Lewis has a great thing about it. He's like, oh, water turns to wine every day in thousands of vineyards across the world, and no one cares. But then when Jesus does it in an instant, everyone goes crazy, right? It's like there we don't understand. Like, we can describe the world, but we do not understand it. I think how people think we understand it. I think a lot of this stuff is still magic. It's like how does how does uh, how does one thing turn into another? How does a baby grow from a baby all the way to an adult? It's like we have descriptions sort of the mechanisms that can cause this, but I think that to let that like demystify the way you view the world is a big mistake.
I'm pointing at,
The
like,
world
I
is
think
much more.
people have lost their wonder. That's a
Yeah.
lot of like what I worry about is like people lose their almost childlike wonder, or I guess the other issue is they almost lean into it too much and drop the science. But I think we can have both. I think we can have the more human, like, wow, this is amazing. This
But
is
I don't. At the same time, I don't think
miracle.
any scientist, like, we're talking about a descriptive like list of accounts of why things happen, right? I don't know of many scientists that would be able to confidently say why the gravitational constant is what it is. They would only go
Right.
as far as saying we know it is something, and then that leads to certain like actions and stuff. None of them would make like these big normative claims, and I think that's where there's a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I could use a different example, but I think the point stands if I could use a more definitive claim, like like the fact that Bruno brought up earlier about what was your friend's name? Like that's a very causal chain, you know.
Yeah.
This A led to B led to C.
The thing is like
Y-
it's the experiential aspect of it. Because for like maybe like remove the praying aspect, right? If I were to be in a situation where I just don't have a lot of money, like my life's going to shit, and then all of a sudden a check comes in the mail from who knows what for $2,000 helping me pay all my bills, were I not just like some like skeptic or like just someone who doesn't care, I would just like be like whatever, this is awesome, but whatever. Were I someone with a religious inclination, I would be just more likely to attribute like the experience of me getting that would be more significant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think I think that's true, but I think you can't get rid of the prayer aspect of it. You really can't, because that is kind of, I mean, the the central teaching in Christianity is that you have to give your life over to Jesus, and then some pretty cool things might start happening. It's like you can't divorce them. It's a
yeah.
package deal,
Especially if
and
you went to
why
church,
it
you'll notice that
happens.
too.
Yeah, and why it happens, I don't know. Like, it's not worldly. Like, what is the causal connection between someone becoming a Christian and certain blessings coming into their lives? I mean, there's no worldly explanation. It's all like there's a story in the Old Testament about a guy. Actually, okay, I don't remember the story, but I'm gonna remind me of it, and I'll find it. But it's basically like he basically, what is it? He's hungry. I wish I remember the guy's name. It's some obscure story, but he's hungry, and then he prays to God. He's like, God, I'm hungry, and then God tells him, oh, go to this city in the middle of nowhere, where they're not Jewish, and you'll go find food. And he's like, are you crazy, God? Like, they're not even Jewish. It's so far away. Like, they're gonna hate me. Whatever. Blah blah blah. But then he goes to the city, and he finds this woman, who's like totally poor, and she's a widow, and she doesn't have anything. And then God is like, oh, okay, and that will look, go ask her for food. And he's like, are you out of your mind? Like, she doesn't have it. She's like a beggar, basically. She's a widow. She doesn't have anything. She's not Jewish. She's not going to give me anything. And then he's like, okay, he goes up to her and he's like, oh, uh, like, can I have some food or whatever? And then she's like, I don't have any food. Like, are you out of your mind? Blah, 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 whatever. And then God is like, oh, ask her one more time. And then after he asks her for the final time, that's when, she gives him food, whatever, and they have like they eat together, blah blah, and he finally got what he wanted. And it's like that story is just like the classic where it's like, by worldly logic, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, why, like, he did everything that did not make sense in the eyes of the world. He kept asking when there shouldn't have been anything, but because he put his faith in God, it ended up paying dividends. It ended up going just the way that God always knew that it would go, but that you didn't know. You didn't know what He was planning. So it's like, it's this idea that it's like, in putting your faith in God and joining this plan, then things just start. I mean, like, it's not like a prosperity gospel thing. It's not like you'll be rich, but it's just like, you will be blessed, right? Like, there are blessings on earth that God will give you. And so I think you can't divorce the prayer aspect from it. It's like an idea of, that's what the religion teaches. It's like, you have to pray, you have to believe in God, you have to put your faith in Jesus, and then it doesn't make sense, but yeah,
I think my
it
biggest
doesn't
issue
always make sense.
with the story just seems to be the fact that the series of events, right? He becomes a Christian, prays, and then his parents accept him. If we take it with like a divine element, does that not suggest that, okay, so if he wasn't a Christian, he just fuck him, we don't really care. God wouldn't care. It doesn't really it doesn't really mix with me the whole idea of, again, like revelation, in the sense of if Christianity is the one true religion, and he then didn't pray or didn't get this, it doesn't really fit with an all-loving God, because if it was prayer that caused it, so let's say he didn't pray, he wouldn't get what he wanted. Is that really an all-loving God, even though God knows that he wants these kind of things?
I like your question, and I think I have an answer for you to this. One of my favorite Kierkegaard quotes is, "Praying does not change God, but it changes the one who prays."
Mhm.
Basically, if I pray for what God did in my head in that story was he didn't change the opportunity of the man finding food, like going to that place and finding food.
Mhm.
What happened was the man changed so that he had access to, like, his condition changed. Like, he became more aware of these signs and was able to follow it to its, conclusion. So it's like I'm not changing what God is going to give me. What I'm doing is I'm opening myself up to see the path that he has set out for me.
So the
Yeah.
suggestion is that if he didn't pray, he would still get his parents just
He
accept
wouldn't
him.
be able to see it. It's like I mean, again, it's like more, you have to
wasn't
kind of
something-
believe in free will, right? In this sort of
Yeah,
way.
no, I get that, but it wasn't something that happened like he could see. It was something that happened to him, which is why I kind of struggled with the example.
I'm not sure it happened to him. I think it got, at least the way I interpret the story is that at least the way I see God, and maybe other Christians can disagree with me, is sometimes it's almost like an intuition. It's almost like he gave him the intuition to follow this. It's not, maybe God didn't literally talk
Yeah.
to him, but what he did was he opened up his heart so that he could see this, whatever
I
it
get
was.
I get it in the context of that example, but in the context of the friend who was accepted by his parents, that wasn't something he could see. That was something that his parents did to him. Like he couldn't see his parents like accepting him, blah blah, because his mum called him specifically. So in
I
that
think
example,
his condition affects his parents too, though, right? If I don't seem very serious about something, if I'm not praying for something, I'm going to be acting differently, and I think my
Mhm,
parents would pick up on that.
sure, but in like the one day
But
that
also,
like
can I just
Yeah, go ahead.
like again, like I don't know if there's. It's like, what would have happened if he hadn't become a Christian? It's like I have no idea. Like I don't know like what this counterfactual. It's like for me, it's just I don't know. It's hard for me not to see it anything. It's like almost a double blessing the way I see it, where it's like, oh, not only did he get did he get to go off to get the blessing from his parents to go off to grad school. But let's say, okay, let's do the counterfactual. What if he had still gotten it but hadn't prayed? Then it's like, well, then he wouldn't have gotten closer to God, which is also a massive blessing. So it's like, but the way that things ended up happening, it's like not only did he get this, but he also got closer to God. And it's hard to say if it would have happened if he hadn't prayed. I mean, I don't know. It's just the fact is that it did happen because he did pray. Maybe if he hadn't prayed, God would have blessed him in some other way, or would have led him towards him in some other path, or would have delivered that blessing in a way that would have made him seen that he should have prayed or something. I don't know. I mean, there's a billion,
But I mean, my
there's
suggestion
a
is more of like
billion ways it could have gone down.
a bigger question, which is like, why did he specifically get that blessing? Why doesn't everyone get their parents' acceptance? Why is it just him? Is it just because of his conversion to Christianity, or what? Do you get what I mean?
The one thing I've been kind of thinking about is it's like some people, unfortunately, or like I guess fortunately, unfortunately, depending on whether or not we're gonna accept that God is real and everything. Some people are given an opportunity. It might not be obvious, but some people are given an opportunity to change the way they see the world, right? And some people simply are not. And it's that the view of the world, the way you accept certain truths, the way you change opinions, or one thing happens versus another, there does seem to be an aspect that's not like a conscious choice, right? The whole like nature nurture
Henry,
idea, and then that's
was your
just
question like, why didn't other people get the opportunity to pray and to receive that grace, in a
not to pray or
sense?
to receive that grace, but to be disposed enough to, for example, accept God.
Like, why weren't they granted
Why aren't they granted the disposition?
That's a really good question.
I'm reading.
I appreciate your questions.
Oh, hey, see
I'm
that.
reading Hermes. Oh, sorry. I'm
No,
reading
you can go ahead.
Hermes Trismegistus, and you can relate it to like raising consciousness. So like as you ascend, you are able to see
Yeah.
more, both in
But
the
then
world.
the
and
question would be
yourself.
like, why didn't this person's consciousness get raised? Like, why didn't they get or receive the opportunity to do that? You know, I think is kind of the question.
Yeah.
I might need time to think
mean,
about this. That's a really good question, Henry.
Right,
Yeah.
it wasn't me.
I mean, all these questions are very good, and it is like something that I also struggle with, and I think it's something that the Christian tradition struggles with. I mean, it's a great mystery. It's like the idea is that the Holy Spirit convicts your heart. It's like, why does it convict some hearts and not others? I mean, I don't know. It's a mystery.
Right, and then it
I don't
seems
know.
unfair
Divine
from the
mystery.
outside, right? And I
It
get
does seem
that.
unfair, but
And
yeah,
that
it does seem unfair.
question,
I think it just is unfair.
yeah, that question, I think it was brought up in when we were talking about Kierkegaard about like the tribal African kid or like the tribal kid in in the Pacific that was just never allowed disposition or like no matter whether or not he wanted to become Christian, like the option wasn't even there. There was no possible route his life could have taken, for him to be at a point in life where he could accept the word of God, and that seems unfair.
Right, and
I mean,
or
yeah.
you could go ahead.
I mean, I mean, like Catholics have, they have their response to that, which is just, if you've never heard of Jesus, then you'll be judged based off of your conscience, like following your conscience, or your like your response to natural revelation, like design argument, blah blah blah. But I mean, I think for the Christian, it's just I think you would find very few Christians that will say like, "Oh, that guy, that kid born in Africa who never heard of Jesus, yeah, he's just going straight to hell and he's gonna burn forever and it's gonna
Unless
be
you're a
horrible for him."
Presbyterian
Like,
or something like that, some sort of
yeah,
Calvinist.
like the answer is just. I mean, the Catholics have like they're very regimented and they have their answer. It's like, oh, he'll be judged off of conscience and natural revelation. But I think most Christians will just say, well, he'll just be judged fairly given his circumstances, right? So it's
the
well, there's
it's
also
not like for us to worry
the
about.
universalists who think everyone will be saved, right?
Yeah, who thinks
And
everyone will be saved.
I'm more of the
There's that too.
Kierkegaardian too.
The salvation will come, or the goodness, the outcome, everything will come once we're dead, right? And we're just left with this life of no help at all, wherein some people are allowed or given help or granted some sort of help if they accept Jesus Christ into their soul.
That's kind of a really
A
weird
life,
way to view that as a Christian. Like, I don't think that's how we view it at
yeah.
all.
No, but also it's like a life of no help at all. I mean, like to live itself is already like this massive blessing, like to be alive, to, go around, you have food, you have like beautiful nature. I mean, all this stuff is seen as a blessing. So it's not, you don't get no help at all.
But
What
say
about those
that-
kids who don't, like, those kids in Africa, like Chris was saying, who don't have this food, they're starving, they have no access to Jesus. I don't know, how is that a blessing in itself?
But
Well, then
if
you're
they
a
have-
Gnostic,
even if they
right?
have a decent life and they have their health and everything like that, it's the way you can grapple with the problems of life that they're not allowed to have. They don't have any type of consolation or any type of like, I don't know.
Well, this is just the problem of evil now, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is just the
Yeah.
problem of evil. Like, why is there suffering if God is all good? But I don't know. I mean, I think I don't even think the Christian would say, like, Christians would say like, oh, you only get blessings if you accept Christ. It's more so that
Right.
like accepting Christ is the best thing you could do, and it's epic. But I mean, people get blessed all the time.
Pretty
I
much.
mean, everything. Your kids are a blessing. The world is a blessing. And it's interesting to me. It's interesting that this is maybe not so directly responding to what you said, because I take your point. I mean, it's a very, very difficult question that I think everyone struggles with. But it's just interesting to see that Christians are the ones who get accused by people like Nietzsche of denying the world, of saying that like, oh, like we have to live for the next life, that the world here sucks. But then it's people who pose the problem of evil who seem to have this view more so, where it's like, oh, life is not a blessing for everyone. It's like I think every life has some blessings. Some lives are harder than others, but some lives are much harder than others.
But it's the
But
perspective.
I think
the
still a lot of
perspective
good.
that life has value that's not being granted to some people. That's the thing that's a little
Yeah.
bit, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ways you can view suffering too. Like, a lot of people view suffering as the way to grow, right? If I never suffered, I would never grow. Even Nietzsche kind of had this conception. obviously I know you guys are gonna go more deep, like the afflictions that like a baby getting cancer. Like that's a completely I understand it's completely different than like, oh, I'm suffering and I'm growing. But
And you can like
um
bring animal suffering into that as well. Like I can't remember who
right.
I studied it in A level. He used the example of a fawn in a forest fire. I can't remember his name, but like what is that fawn? How is that fawn like growing? It doesn't understand what the forest fire is. It can't avoid the forest fire next time. So
Yeah, like meaningless suffering.
yeah,
Which
it's a whole that's a
probably.
whole can of worms though.
Yeah, I think we need a
But
lot
we'll get
longer
into
to
it
talk
probably
about
next.
that. I think we'll need more time.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your
We'll get
questions.
into
Like
it.
these are actually good ones. I usually don't like a lot of the questions people throw, but these are really good.
Yeah, they are. And they're also, I mean, to again throw out, it's interesting because it's like me and Cade are Christian, but I agree that these are hard questions and that they're very difficult to answer. So
Well, and
I
I
feel
want to
like
be
clearly they're
compassionate
just
too. Like if I just say like,
yeah,
well, it's because there's sin in the world and everyone else has free will, that kid got cancer. That's kind of like unempathetic, you know. And I don't really
yeah.
want
Well,
to say
it can
that.
be cold, a little cold, but it's just
Are you?
interesting to see too. Like, yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna ask, are you guys satisfied with like answers to your questions just being God's unknown? Like God's unknowable. Does that satisfy you guys at all? I'm genuinely curious.
I mean, I just love the mystery. I feel like every day I slowly figure it out. It's
Sure.
not like I'm looking for one answer. I'm trying to live this life the best I can and find my answers as I go.
Hmm.
And I think that's the way everyone lives their life.
Yeah, it's true. And also, there's like like some answers can be unsatisfying. It's like the Trinity. It's like I don't understand it. Sometimes it frustrates me that I don't understand it, but it also I don't know. It's okay, I think, to not, especially when it comes to like revealed truth. Again, like I said before, it's like that's why it was revealed. It's because we wouldn't have figured it out on our own, So it's
Right, because it doesn't
some
make
things you
sense
just
to
kind of
people.
yeah, it doesn't really make sense. But then it's like, and then now you get this revealed truth. You're presented with this great mystery, and then it's like what Cade said. It's like then you get the fun exercise of trying to work it out and maybe understand it a little more every day, and it's fun.
Right,
But
and I do not like the Christians that try to just say they get it. Like, oh, here's the easy answers. This is how it is, just because God said so. I'm not going to say it just because God said so. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. There's still doubt every single day whether I truly believe this or not.
that's true too.
Every single day of my life, I question it. Like, is this really what I believe?
There's this one thing I'm
Gyro has
thinking about,
joined.
or this one thing. When I can't help but feel that this was like a turning point in like just like being a piece of shit skeptic sometimes. But I remember one day my dad told me in the car, or I was asking him about probabilities or something like that on the way to soccer practice. I was asking him like how certain things like in nature, like physics questions basically. And then he told me like, okay, son, basically the one day in which nothing unlikely happens will be the most unlikely day, right? So whenever now I see unlikely things occur, I'm like, oh, this is the most reasonable thing to have happened. And that almost like takes away this ability to look at really uncommon things in life or really random divinely seeming things in life that God maybe is placing right in front of me. I can't help but feel like that I was a little bit like distorted in a way that just kind of no longer lets me be able to view that world in that way.
I mean, for me too, I remember like learning about the statistics of like things happening. It's like the statistics of me being born are literally like basically impossible, right? The statistics
Yeah,
of us engaging in this conversation, every event leading up to now is impossible. So I just try to keep my wonder open, right? That doesn't mean you have to be a Christian, but I don't know. I worry that people don't wonder enough sometimes. They don't question these things. Like, is it really that common? Like that everything led up to this point? Maybe that this specific thing happening makes sense now, but to even get here is like so improbable.
To me, that makes perfect sense though, because something has to have happened. Even if it wasn't this thing, something else would have taken its place. There always has to. It's like
Sure.
a lottery with a given winner. There has to be a winner. We just happen to be one of those winners.
Could be multiple universes. Like I don't know, man. Now we're the quantum.
Yeah, but that's very interesting, Chris. That's a very interesting thing about the probabilities. Yeah, I I think it brings us back to like what we were saying before about science conflicting with faith. It's like I think there can be multiple levels of explanation. You know, it's like it's true. Like something always has to happen, but then you can also ask yourself, like, you know, why this? Why now? Like, what does this mean in the story of my life, right? But it's true. Like, I mean, it is like something always has to happen, and oftentimes unlikely things happen because so many things happen all the time. You know, so
Right.
it's an interesting point.
Well, I should probably get along with life and doing adult stuff because I'm an adult now. But I think for next book club or next meeting, how does like books 1 to 3 sound? Because I think those are like the like it's like the if I'm remembering properly, it's like childhood or like baby infancy, adolescence, and then early adulthood. And it feels like we could
Wasn't the
tackle the
first chapter kind of just like praises and stuff? It's hard to remember too.
yeah. Where'd my book go?
No, the first chapter is mostly him praising, and then he has like he talks about actually, first paragraph he talks about the babies, and he also talks about like certain paradoxes that he doesn't know how to resolve.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, those
Yeah.
sound good. 1 through 3 sounds fine.
Yeah. Cool, yeah.
It might be a lot, Chris. I don't know.
Yeah, it is a lot of. How many pages is
It's
that? Like 80?
in my edition it is
And it's
50 pages.
Oh,
a hard book. I mean, in a week, it's a hard book though.
We could do
we're all grown up. We can do it, right?
Do the first
No,
two.
we can. Yeah,
One and two.
Let's-
first two.
1 and 2. Is that a
How
compromise?
about maybe just for this week we read the first 2 and then see how easy it was, and then
Yeah,
like,
see how we
adjust
feel.
accordingly. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good
if we
idea.
can read more or less later.
Yeah. I'm cool with that. Yeah, it'll just be like early childhood and then adolescence, just like the biographical piece, and then we'll bring in everything else he kind of starts to talk about. Let's try that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cool beans. The second half was like super fun for me. I had fun. So thanks for
Me too.
showing up, everyone.
Yeah, it's all the stuff we used to talk about, Chris, in person over beers. Wow.
Oh,
No, you're so far
the
away
good old
from me.
days. Fuck.
Yeah.
All right. I'll catch you guys. Maybe I'll open up a beer next time. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe we need some drugs.
We need
Yeah.
some drinking in here. Virtual philosophical bar talks.
Right, because then God will
It's-
start making more sense, right?
No, I think it was
That's true.
it was the sultans, I believe, or a certain class of rulers that would they would debate everything 2 times. One time over beers and drinks, and then one time again while they were sober to make sure that they were like good choices or good like conclusions when it came to like making like big political decisions or like big things.
Yeah, you gotta open your
That's awesome.
mind.
Yeah.
Wait, let's meet in 5 hours and let's all be drunk by then, and we'll rehash the same topics.
Okay.
Okay.
Sweet. Peace out, guys.
Everyone do
Bye-bye.
communion.
Catch you on the flip. Heck yeah.
But